Here's a story, Brian. You and I are white guys living in this city. I live in Fulton Heights, and I have my wife and I own our home, and we have paperwork for our title. If I look in that paperwork, there is a page that says ownership of this property is restricted to members of the white race. That is still there in my paperwork because at one point in this city there were racial covenants. There were rules about which races could own property.
And we're in the North, Yankee North.
Yeah, in the North. This is all true in the North. And I think a lot of people have heard of redlining, and they understand how there was, racist policies in place with regards to mortgages. But it's not just some system that exists out there that is part of some history that we don't know. The house that I live in has a racial covenant that prohibits black people, Hispanic people, Jewish people from owning that home. That property was not allowed to be owned by anyone other than the white race, as it was defined when it was written. My house was built in the early 40s. Now here's the thing. So in the 1960s, thanks to the civil rights movement, racial covenants like that became unenforceable. You can no longer restrict ownership of homes to members of certain races. You can't discriminate on the basis of race in housing.
At least on
in
the
general.
page.
On the page. But that page is still there in my paperwork, and even though it's legally unenforceable, it has never been broken. My neighborhood is still extremely white, not entirely white, but still extremely white. And my home, as far as I know, has my little square piece of property has never been owned by anyone other than a member of the white race. So those structures were put in place by people who it's fair to say they were white supremacists. They had a white supremacist vision of the world. And we sit here today, nice, well-meaning white people, and think, well, I'm just going to be kind to people, and that's going to solve the problem. Well, it doesn't solve the problem, because these structures were put in place, and they persist. Throughout generations, they persist, even though the property's been sold, even though all these things have happened, these things still exist in our city. And we can take that right up to any number of things, any number of histories that you want to look at. And I think you were alluding to the more recent history of GRPD, and those are very real things that have happened. Yeah. And I think those maybe influenced what happened on Saturday more so.
Sure. Let's hit pause on that. We can pick it up in a second. But I think the residue of these things, even though they're technically unenforceable, like in real estate and in banking and redlining, there's a lot of residue in that it might be technically illegal, but we function as a society very much that way. These things aren't overtly. If you ask most people, white people in your neighborhood, they would think they were pretty, probably fairly woke in that term. And I hesitate to use that word because I think they would be fairly uninformed about just how invisible some of this stuff is, unless you're black, unless you're a minority in this community, and then you battle it every single day.
Because you can't ignore it, right?
Because these are it inhibits your mobility, and so. But when we move so effortlessly, we're like, well, what's the problem? I don't really see what's happening because you don't have that first-person perspective of it.
It was possible for those things to be invisible, and I think this gets into a broader discussion about whiteness and how it operates and how whiteness operates on white people. But I think a big part of it is that it makes it invisible to people who would otherwise be allies to people of color. A lot of the impacts of whiteness are invisible, and you could say that in policing as well. As a white person, I don't have police interactions like black men have in this city. And up until the point where we had a lot of cell phone videos out there and police cam videos, that never would have become visible to me. I never would have heard about it. And in the past few years, it's become more and more apparent, and it's been more and more impossible to deny that experience is not just a few incidents, right? That's a widespread experience for people of color in this city. That is the majority of their experiences with police.
This Full Exposure podcast episode has been made possible through the support of Metro Health, University of Michigan Health, and Dr. Peter Hahn. who believe that creativity and the arts are essential to a rich, healthy, and fulfilling life.